There's an unspoken truth about children who were unseen. They often grow into adults who doubt they're worthy of being noticed. They enter rooms and instinctively make themselves smaller. They fall in love and question if they're too much to handle. Even when they succeed, they brace for it to be dismissed as if fading into the background is the only place they truly belong. This isn't because they lack value or ability, but because their sense of self was quietly shaped in absence. In psychology, it's known as an internalized neglect pattern, a way the mind learns to expect disregard, to prepare for rejection, to believe that having needs is a flaw. A child left unseen too many times eventually stops reaching out. They come to believe that longing for care, comfort, or understanding is asking for too much. Have you ever noticed a child in a crowded room, gently tugging at a parent's sleeve, waiting for the slightest glance, a flicker of recognition? You might see it on a playground, in a classroom, or within your own home. They're not the ones who shout or cry for attention. They withdraw quietly, slipping into the background. To an observer, it might seem like nothing significant is happening, but inside that small, waiting heart, something irreversible is taking shape. Because for a child, being unseen isn't a small hurt. It's a crack that runs through the core of who they believe they are. And here's the difficult truth. Neglect in childhood doesn't always wear the face of abuse. It doesn't always sound like anger or feel like harm. Sometimes it's just absence, quiet, consistent, unintentional. It's the questions left unanswered, the eyes that don't meet yours, the birthday quietly forgotten. It's the parent who's too weary, too preoccupied, too far away to see what's missing. Yet the impact of that silence runs deep, shaping how a child learns to see themselves, to interpret love, and to connect with others long into adulthood. We like to believe children are naturally resilient, that they recover from anything. And in some ways, they do. They learn, they adjust, they carry on. But adaptation isn't the same as healing. When a child grows accustomed to being unseen, they survive by becoming smaller, by tucking away their needs, by convincing themselves they matter a little less. It's a quiet kind of survival that gets them through childhood, but later follows them into adulthood, shaping patterns they can't always name or understand. From a psychological point of view, acknowledgement is more than comfort, it's survival. Studies in developmental psychology have long shown that children need 3 essentials to grow well: safety, stimulation, and connection. When any one of these is absent, something in their growth falters. But connection, the experience of being noticed, listened to, and valued, is the thread that weaves directly into a child's sense of self. John Bowlby, the pioneer of attachment theory, taught that a secure bond one built when a caregiver consistently sees and responds to a child's needs lays the groundwork for trust. That trust becomes the quiet template for every relationship that follows. But when a child is met with silence, inconsistency, or absence, the wound runs deeper than momentary disappointment. They begin to form a painful belief. Maybe love isn't meant for me. Maybe I'm not worth being noticed. This isn't an overstatement. Neuroscience has shown that when a child's bids for connection go unanswered again and again, the brain registers it as danger. The stress response ignites, cortisol surges, and over time the nervous system learns to brace for rejection. Anxiety becomes the new normal. Emotional balance grows unsteady. And yet, to the outside world, it may look like nothing more than a calm, quiet child. When a child is openly mistreated, the pain is easy to see. But when a child is overlooked, the wound is quieter, harder to notice, yet just as deep. A child may stop asking questions when they learn no one will reply. They may stop showing joy when no one seems to care. With time, they begin to fade, not from sight, but from feeling. Psychologists have a name for this quiet disappearance: emotional neglect. Unlike physical neglect, which leaves visible marks, emotional neglect creates wounds that hide beneath the skin. These quiet injuries often stay unnoticed until adulthood, when the once forgotten child tries to love, to dream, or to find meaning, only to collide with the invisible, unhealed pain still living within them. For instance, many adults raised without acknowledgement struggle with fragile self-worth. They hold back their voices, convinced no one truly cares to listen. Some fear rejection so deeply that they keep their distance from others. Others, in contrast, chase approval relentlessly, twisting themselves to please everyone around them because somewhere inside, they're still trying to earn the recognition that never came. Picture being 8 years old, racing home from school, clutching a drawing you can't wait to share. You lift it proudly toward your parent, but they're deep in a phone call. You try again at dinner, yet the moment slips by unnoticed. Eventually, you tuck the drawing away and never bring it up again. Now imagine that happening not once, but dozens, maybe hundreds of times throughout childhood. The child begins to learn that excitement is risky, that pride goes unseen, and that joy is something safest, kept quietly within. Years later, that same child, now grown, may find it hard to honor their own victories, brushing them off as undeserved or small. The one once ignored becomes the adult who quietly overlooks themselves. Research supports this pattern. A 2019 study published in the Journal of Child Psychology and Psychiatry found a strong link between emotional neglect in childhood and persistent loneliness in adulthood, independent of social surroundings. In other words, even with friends, family, or love nearby, a subtle hollowness can remain, a quiet ache where recognition should have lived. Most parents who overlook their children don't do it out of malice. More often, it stems from exhaustion, financial strain, emotional burnout, or simply not realizing how vital recognition truly is. A parent juggling multiple jobs may have little left to give. A parent battling depression might not see their child's quiet calls for attention. And today, the constant pull of screens, alerts, and digital noise can easily drown out real connection. But intentions don't soften the wound. To the child, absence feels the same, no matter the reason behind it. That's why understanding the inner world of the ignored child matters, because awareness is the first step toward ending the pattern. Children who grow up unseen often develop coping habits that, at first, can be mistaken for strength. Some turn deeply self-reliant, learning to meet their own needs long before they should have to. Others become relentless achievers, chasing the recognition they were once denied. Some turn into peacemakers, doing anything to preserve a fragile sense of harmony. But beneath those polished strengths lies a quiet kind of fatigue, the tiredness of always having to survive alone. The self-sufficient child grows into an adult who finds it hard to rely on anyone. The overachiever turns into the perfectionist, forever chasing standards that never feel enough. The peacekeeper becomes the people pleaser, afraid that saying no will cost them love. And maybe the saddest transformation is the child who simply stops trying, the one who quietly decides, if no one notices, what's the point? That child often carries indifference into adulthood, wrestling with purpose, drive, and belief. Ignored children rarely share their story. How do you describe what it means to disappear? There's no clear trauma to name. No scars to display, only quiet. Only the ghost of moments that should have mattered, but somehow never did. That silence can become its own kind of wall. Adults who once felt unseen often struggle to ask for support, afraid their pain will be overlooked again. In therapy, they may downplay their past, saying nothing terrible ever happened to me. But the absence of what was needed is its own kind of wound. It's like spending your childhood in a room without air surviving. Yes, but never truly learning how to breathe. The long-term consequences are tangible and well documented. Findings from the National Institute of Mental Health reveal that adults who faced emotional neglect in childhood are more prone to anxiety, depression, and struggles with intimacy. Similarly, research from Harvard's Center on the Developing Child shows that consistent recognition during early years strengthens neural circuits tied to resilience, while neglect gradually erodes them. In simple terms, being seen and acknowledged isn't a privilege. It's a fundamental requirement for healthy growth. This doesn't mean every unseen child is destined to struggle. Many grow into deeply empathetic adults, shaped by the ache of once being invisible. But it does mean their path is often heavier. It means spending years untangling beliefs that took root long before they understood they had a choice. So where does healing start? Not with flawless self-assurance, and not with sudden confidence, but with awareness. With the quiet, courageous act of telling yourself, what I went through mattered. My needs were real. My pain deserves to be acknowledged. For the once forgotten child now living in an adult's body, the first act of healing is often self-recognition, offering themselves the validation they never receive. And while that may sound intangible, it's deeply practical. It can be as simple as pausing to honor your own effort, as simple as naming your emotions aloud, even if no one else hears them, as simple as daring to believe your inner world carries weight. Because the truth is, acknowledgement isn't something we grow out of. The desire to be seen doesn't fade with time, it only hides beneath the surface. Healing begins when we gently bring it back into view. Think about how this pattern appears in friendships. The once ignored child often grows into the quiet friend, the one who listens with care but hides their own pain. They're the person who's always there for everyone else, yet rarely reaches out when they're hurting. To others, they may seem endlessly giving, but beneath that generosity lingers a quiet question. Why don't I matter the same way they do? This isn't selfishness. It's the simple wish for reciprocity, for a balance they were never taught to expect. In romantic relationships, these old patterns often reveal themselves in deeper ways. Some adults who grew up unseen become fiercely attached, holding on tightly to anyone who offers affection. Others build walls instead, keeping love at arm's length because vulnerability feels unsafe. Both responses stem from the same wound, the quiet terror that love will fade, that their needs will once again go unanswered. And here lies the paradox. The once ignored child often becomes one of the most attuned partners you'll ever meet, deeply empathetic, almost instinctively aware of others' emotions, precisely because they've known the ache of invisibility. Studies in developmental psychology reveal that children who grow up neglected often become expert observers. They learn to read faces, voices, and even the smallest changes in energy because their safety once depended on it. They learned early when to speak and when silence was safer. In adulthood, that sensitivity can seem like a strength, an ability to deeply understand others, but it comes with a cost. They become so finely attuned to the emotions around them that they lose touch with their own hearing, every heartbeat but their own. There's another layer to this, one we seldom name. When a child grows up unseen, their sense of self can stay undefined. They were never mirrored, their feelings and thoughts never reflected clearly enough to confirm they were real to someone else. So as adults, they often chase recognition, not from vanity, but from a longing to finally see themselves through another's eyes. Because identity takes shape in reflection. And without that mirror, the boundaries of self remain soft, uncertain, and easily lost. But here's where something extraordinary unfolds. Even when a child grows up unseen, a small ember of hope remains. That's why so many adults who were once ignored go searching for understanding. They study human behavior. They write their truths in journals. They sit in therapy rooms, learning to speak what was once silenced. They refuse to remain trapped in the hush that shaped them. They choose to unlearn it. That choice itself is strength, and healing does happen. Neuroscience reminds us that the brain is not unchangeable. It bends, reshapes, and learns anew. So even if someone grew up unseen, they can still create new pathways in adulthood. Each time they speak and are met with understanding, the brain records safety. Each time they draw a boundary and it's honored, the body remembers trust. Every genuine connection becomes a gentle ripple, slowly smoothing the rough edges of old pain. Healing rarely arrives as revelation. Sometimes it's simply telling a friend, "I need you to hear me right now." Sometimes it's finding the courage to say, "That hurt me," instead of burying it. Sometimes it's sitting in silence and softly saying to yourself, "My feelings are real," even if no one ever said it first. These small moments are quiet revolutions, gentle acts of defiance against years of silence. And the truth is, none of it comes easily. Those who grew up unseen often carry a deep fear of rejection, so voicing their needs can feel unsafe. Drawing boundaries can feel like abandonment. Reaching out for help can feel like failure. Yet, the bravery to act, despite that fear, is what begins to mend the fractured self. It matters to acknowledge this too. Parents who ignore their children are not always unkind. Sometimes they were once unseen themselves. Sometimes they were buried under their own pain, distractions, or quiet storms they didn't know how to name. This doesn't erase the hurt, but it shows how neglect often flows silently from one generation to the next. When an adult begins to heal from being unseen, they are not just mending their own heart, they are loosening the grip of a story passed down for years. Think of it like this: every ignored child who learns to hear themselves becomes a parent, a friend, or a partner who truly listens. Every ignored child who learns to honor their own needs becomes someone who helps others do the same. Healing spreads, softly but powerfully. And this leads us to one of the quietest but most profound truths. The child who once felt invisible often believes they left no trace behind. Yet, their story carries an extraordinary kind of strength. The journey from being unseen to learning to be visible again holds a quiet power that reaches far beyond themselves. When they share their story, they give voice to others who have stayed silent. When they choose to heal, they show that it's possible, and in doing so, they light the path for someone else to follow. So if you were that child, the one who waited quietly for someone to notice, who sat alone, wondering if your feelings were too much, who questioned whether your presence ever truly mattered, hear this now. It did matter then, and it still matters now. You matter now. Healing isn't about forgetting what happened. It's about offering yourself the love that should have been there from the start. It's about learning to see yourself not through the lens of absence, but through the lens of kindness. It's about understanding that being unseen shaped you, but it will never be the whole story of who you are. The psychology of the unseen child is a story marked by pain, but also by remarkable endurance. It's the story of how quiet can leave scars, yet how finding one's voice can also awaken insight. It's the story of how invisibility can wound deeply, yet also nurture a rare empathy, a stronger longing for connection, and an unshakable pursuit of truth. In the end, the child who once went unseen often grows into the adult who makes sure no one else feels invisible. And in that quiet, imperfect act, tender, human, and brave, they uncover something sacred. They were never without worth. They were simply waiting for their own eyes to find them.